The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones as Sergeant William Hayes adjusted his red tunic for the 100th time that day. 23 years he had served as a Queen's Guard at Buckingham Palace, and never once had he broken protocol. His black bearskin hat sat perfectly straight, his rifle held at the exact regulation angle, and his face remained as still as carved stone. The tourists gathered as they always did, snapping photos and trying to make him smile. Children would wave, adults would pose beside him, and occasionally someone would try to touch his uniform. Through it all, William remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the palace gates. This was his duty, his honor, and his way of life. But today felt different. Today, a small girl with pigtails and a bright yellow dress kept returning to his post. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old, and unlike the other children, who quickly lost interest, she seemed fascinated by his stillness. She would approach, study his face with the serious concentration only children possess, then skip back to her mother before returning again. On her 4th visit, she did something unexpected. Instead of staring or waving, she quietly sat down, on the ground beside his post, cross-legged like she was settling in for story time. Her mother called to her, but the little girl shook her head and remained seated, looking up at William with patient, trusting eyes. Hours passed, and the crowds changed, but the little girl stayed. William's training told him to ignore her completely, to maintain his focus on his duties. Yet something about her quiet presence began to affect him in ways he couldn't explain. She wasn't trying to get a reaction like the others. She was simply keeping him company, as if she understood that standing perfectly still for hours might be lonely work. As the afternoon wore on, William noticed the girl's mother checking her watch repeatedly and speaking in hushed tones with a man who appeared to be her husband. They looked worried, glancing between their daughter and their phones. The little girl remained oblivious to their concern, occasionally humming softly to herself while maintaining her vigil beside the guard. It was then that William overheard fragments of conversation that made his heart skip a beat. The mother was speaking to someone on the phone, her voice strained with emotion. "The test results. Tomorrow morning. We have to tell her tonight. She's too young to understand what cancer means." The words hit William like a physical blow. This wasn't just any child sitting beside his post. This was a little girl who might be facing the fight of her life, and somehow in her innocence, she had chosen to spend what could be precious time simply sitting with a stranger in a red coat. William's military training had prepared him for many things, but not for this moment. Not for the way his heart began to race beneath his perfectly pressed uniform, or how his carefully maintained composure started to crack at the edges. He had stood guard through protests, celebrations, and countless tourist encounters. But a 5-year-old girl in a yellow dress was proving to be his greatest challenge yet. The sun began to set, casting the palace in golden light, and still the little girl remained. Her parents had moved closer, clearly preparing to leave, but she seemed reluctant to go. She looked up at William one more time, and for the first time in 23 years of service, he found himself truly seeing the person looking back at him instead of looking through them. In that moment, William faced the most difficult decision of his military career. Every fiber of his training screamed at him to maintain protocol, to remain the perfect, emotionless symbol of the crown's dignity. But something deeper, something fundamentally human, was stirring within him. As he watched the little girl's parents approach to collect her, he realized that sometimes the most important moments in life happen when we choose to be human first, and everything else second. The weight of his decision settled on his shoulders, like his heavy ceremonial uniform. What happened next would either be the most meaningful moment of his career, or the end of it entirely. The little girl's parents reached her just as she was starting to stand up from her patient seat beside William's post. Her father, a tall man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "Come on, Emma," her mother said softly. "We need to go back to the hotel now." Emma looked up at her parents, then back at William. "But I haven't said goodbye to the soldier yet." she said in that matter-of-fact way children have of stating what seems obvious to them. Her mother's eyes filled with tears she was trying hard to hide. "Sweetheart, the guards can't talk to us. They have very important work to do." Emma considered this seriously, her small brow furrowed in concentration. "But he's been working so hard all day. Doesn't he get tired? Doesn't anyone ever say thank you to him?" The simple question hung in the evening air like a bell that had been rung. William felt something shift inside his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with his heavy uniform, and everything to do with the pure kindness radiating from this small person. Other tourists had begun to notice the family's interaction with the guard. Phones were being raised, cameras focusing, as people sensed that something unusual might be about to happen. The crowd grew larger, forming a semicircle around William's post, everyone waiting to see what would unfold. Emma's father knelt down, beside his daughter. "You're right, sweetheart. Someone should thank him, but we need to do it quietly, okay? We can't disturb him." The little girl nodded solemnly, then stepped closer to William's post. In her small, clear voice, she said, "Thank you, Mr. Soldier, for standing here all day to keep everyone safe. I hope your feet don't hurt too much." The crowd around them had gone completely silent. Even the usual sounds of London traffic seemed muted as everyone waited to see how the stone-faced guard would respond to the child's heartfelt words. William felt every muscle in his body trembling with the effort of maintaining his position. His training was at war with his humanity, and for several long seconds protocol won. He remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed straight ahead. But then Emma did something that shattered his resolve completely. She reached into her small backpack and pulled out a slightly crumpled flower, a dandelion she must have picked from one of the palace gardens. Without hesitation, she placed it gently at the base of his post like laying a wreath at a memorial. "This is for you," she whispered. "My grandma says flowers make everything better." That was the moment William's 23 years of perfect military discipline finally cracked. The sight of this brave little girl who would face her own battle tomorrow, giving him her treasured flower, broke something open inside him that he didn't even know was closed. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, at first William began to lower his gaze. His eyes, which had stared straight ahead through thousands of hours of duty, moved down to meet Emma's upturned face. The crowd gasped collectively as they witnessed what they all knew was an unprecedented break in protocol. William's lips, which had remained pressed in a firm line for hours at a time, began to curve into the gentlest of smiles. It wasn't much, just a slight softening of his expression. But to Emma, it was like the sun breaking through clouds. Her face lit up with pure joy. "He smiled at me," she whispered excitedly to her parents. "The soldier smiled at me." The crowd around them erupted in quiet applause, understanding that they were witnessing something special. Cameras clicked and phones recorded, but there was a reverence to the moment that kept everyone from being disruptive. William knew that his commanding officers would likely hear about this within hours. Security cameras had certainly captured his breach of protocol, and the photos and videos being taken would probably be shared across social media within minutes. His career, his reputation, everything he had built over more than 2 decades of service was potentially at risk. But as he looked into Emma's bright, happy face, he realized that some things were more important than rules. Some moments demanded that we choose love over law, compassion over regulation, and humanity over protocol. The little girl's parents stood behind her, tears streaming down both their faces as they watched their daughter's pure joy at this simple, human connection. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations about treatments in hospitals, but tonight, their child was experiencing magic. Word of William's gentle interaction with Emma spread through the palace faster than wildfire. By the time his shift ended 2 hours later, his commanding officer, Colonel James Morrison, was waiting for him in the guardroom. The stern-faced man had served alongside William for over a decade and had never seen him show even the slightest crack in his professional demeanor. "Sergeant Hayes," Colonel Morrison said, his voice carefully neutral, "we need to talk." William stood at attention, knowing full well what this conversation would be about. Security footage had undoubtedly captured his moment of humanity, and the photos circulating on social media were already being shared thousands of times with captions like, "Royal Guard's heart melts," and "The moment protocol met pure love." "Sir, I take full responsibility for my actions," William said before the colonel could speak. "I understand the seriousness of breaking protocol, and I'm prepared to accept whatever consequences." Colonel Morrison raised his hand, stopping him mid-sentence. To William's surprise, the older man's expression wasn't one of anger, but something much more complex, a mixture of understanding, concern, and perhaps even pride. "Before we discuss consequences," the colonel said, "I think you should know something about that little girl you smiled at today." William's heart clenched. Had something happened to Emma after they left? Had his breach of protocol somehow caused problems for her family? The colonel continued. "Her name is Emma Chen. She's 5 years old, and tomorrow morning she's starting treatment for acute lymphoblastic leukemia at Great Ormond Street Hospital. Her parents brought her to London for what they thought might be their last family trip together." The words hit William like a physical blow. He had sensed something important about Emma, but learning the full extent of her situation made his chest tighten with emotion. "There's more," Colonel Morrison said, pulling out his phone. "This video has been viewed over 1 million times in the past 3 hours." He showed William the screen, which displayed footage of the moment Emma placed the flower at his post, and he smiled at her. The comment section was flooded with messages from around the world, people sharing their own stories of sick children, praising William's compassion, and expressing how much hope the simple interaction had given them. But it was one comment, in particular, that made William's breath catch. "Thank you to the kind soldier who made my daughter so happy on what might be her last day, feeling truly carefree." Emma hasn't stopped talking about her soldier and how he smiled just for her. "You gave our family a moment of pure joy when we desperately needed it." Emma's mom. Colonel Morrison pocketed his phone and looked directly at William. "In 32 years of military service, I've never seen anything like the response to what you did today. The palace's official social media accounts are being flooded with messages of support. The Queen's private secretary has received calls from children's hospitals asking if more guards might be able to visit sick children." William felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what his simple smile had set in motion. He had expected disciplinary action, possibly even dismissal from his position. Instead, it seemed like his moment of human connection had touched people around the world in ways he never could have imagined. "However," the colonel continued, and William braced himself for the inevitable punishment, "protocol exists for important reasons. We can't have guards breaking formation every time a tourist wants a photo or a reaction. But what happened today, this was different." The older man walked to the window overlooking the palace grounds, where tourists were still gathered, many holding flowers in tribute to the viral moment they had witnessed or heard about online. "I received a call 20 minutes ago," Colonel Morrison said. "It was from Buckingham Palace's communications director. Apparently the story has reached such international attention that it's being covered by news outlets from New York to Tokyo. More importantly, children's charities are reporting a surge in donations, all inspired by that 30-second interaction you had with Emma." William remained silent, unsure how to process this information. In his mind, he had simply responded to a child's kindness with kindness of his own. The idea that such a small gesture could ripple outward to affect so many people seemed almost impossible to comprehend. "There's going to be a formal review of what happened," the colonel said, turning back to face William. "But I want you to know that I've already submitted my report, and it recommends no disciplinary action. Sometimes, Sergeant Hayes, being the perfect soldier means knowing when to be perfectly human." Relief flooded through William, but it was quickly replaced by something else, a sense of purpose he had never felt before. His 23 years of dutiful service had been important, but today he had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing a person in uniform could do was simply acknowledge the humanity in others. 3 weeks after the incident with Emma, William found himself at the center of a media storm unlike anything he could have imagined. The video of his gentle smile had now been viewed over 50 million times across various social media platforms, spawning countless reaction videos, news segments, and even artistic tributes from around the world. But more importantly, to William, he had been receiving regular updates about Emma's progress from her mother, Sarah Chen, who had reached out to him through the palace's official channels. The little girl was responding well to her treatment at Great Ormond Street Hospital, and according to her latest message, she kept a printed photo of William on her bedside table, telling the nurses that her soldier was watching over her. The Palace communications team had been working around the clock to manage the unprecedented positive attention. Donation pages for children's cancer research had raised over £2 million, with people specifically mentioning Emma and William's story as their inspiration for giving. Children's hospitals across the UK were reporting increased visits, from service members wanting to spend time with young patients. It was on a drizzly Thursday morning when William received the most unexpected news of all. Colonel Morrison approached him during his pre-duty briefing with an expression William had never seen before, something between excitement and disbelief. "Sergeant Hayes, I've just received word from the highest levels of command," the colonel began. "Her Majesty has personally requested to meet with you." William felt his knees go weak. In all his years of service, he had never had a personal audience with the Queen. Royal guards were meant to be invisible protectors, not individuals, who drew attention to themselves. "Sir, I don't understand. Have I done something wrong?" Colonel Morrison actually smiled. Another unprecedented occurrence. Quite the opposite. The Queen has been following Emma's story closely. It turns out Her Majesty has been personally contributing to the hospital's fundraising efforts inspired by your interaction with the child. The meeting was arranged for the following morning in one of the palace's private receiving rooms. William spent the entire night beforehand unable to sleep, running through every possible scenario in his mind. He had learned proper protocol for meeting the monarch during his training, but this situation was so unusual that no manual could have prepared him for it. When the moment finally arrived, William was surprised by how informal the setting felt. Instead of the grand throne room he had imagined, he was led to a comfortable sitting room with warm lighting and fresh flowers. Flowers that reminded him immediately of the dandelion Emma had left at his post. The Queen entered quietly, accompanied only by a single aide, and William was struck by how genuinely warm her smile was as she approached him. "Sergeant Hayes," she said, gesturing for him to sit, "I wanted to thank you personally for the kindness you showed young Emma, and for the positive attention you've brought to our armed forces." William, still somewhat overwhelmed by the surreal nature of the situation, managed to reply, "Your Majesty, I was simply responding to a child's kindness. I hope my breach of protocol hasn't caused any embarrassment to the Crown." The Queen's eyes twinkled with what appeared to be genuine amusement. "Sergeant, in my many years of service, I've learned that sometimes the most important rules are the unwritten ones, like showing compassion to a sick child. Your actions that day embodied the very best of what it means to serve." She went on to explain that she had been in contact with Emma's family and had arranged for the little girl to receive a special visit to the palace once her treatment allowed it. More significantly, she announced that a new program was being established, the Emma Initiative, which would train select royal guards to make supervised visits to children's hospitals throughout London. "Your moment of humanity, Sergeant Hayes, has opened doors we never knew existed," the Queen said. "You've shown that our guards are not just symbols of tradition, but real people capable of bringing hope to those who need it most." As the meeting concluded, the Queen made one final completely unexpected gesture. She handed William a small framed photograph, the same image that Emma kept beside her hospital bed, showing the moment he smiled at her beside his post. "This is for you to remember," she said, "that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the largest waves of change." Walking out of that room, William realized that his life had fundamentally changed. He was no longer just Sergeant William Hayes, Queen's Guard. He had become a symbol of the power of human connection, and with that came both tremendous honor and profound responsibility. 6 months had passed since that life-changing afternoon with Emma, and William's world had transformed in ways he never could have anticipated. The Emma Initiative had become one of the most successful community outreach programs in the history of the British Armed Forces. with carefully selected guards making weekly visits to children's hospitals across London and beyond. William himself had become the program's unofficial ambassador, though he approached this role with the same quiet dignity he had brought to his regular duties. Every Tuesday afternoon he would trade his ceremonial red tunic for civilian clothes and visit Great Ormond Street Hospital, where he had become a beloved figure among the young patients. On this particular Tuesday, William was making his way through the cancer ward when he heard a familiar voice calling his name. "Mr. William, Mr. William." Emma's voice rang out from down the hallway, and William turned to see her practically bouncing with excitement, despite the IV line still attached to her small arm. 8 months of treatment had changed Emma's appearance. Her hair was shorter and she was thinner than before, but her spirit remained as bright as ever. She had become something of a celebrity in the hospital, known for telling everyone about her soldier and how their friendship had started the program that brought so much joy to sick children. "Look what I made you," Emma said, thrusting a colorful drawing toward William as he knelt down to her level. The picture showed 2 stick figures standing side by side, one tall in a red coat, one small in a yellow dress, with a rainbow arching over them and dozens of hearts floating around them. "It's us on the day we met," Emma explained seriously. "Mummy helped me write the words." William looked at the bottom of the drawing where careful adult handwriting had helped Emma spell out, "Thank you for smiling at me and showing me that kindness makes everything better." As William admired Emma's artwork, her mother Sarah approached, with tears in her eyes. But these were tears of joy, not the fearful tears he had seen that first day at the palace. "William, I have the most wonderful news," Sarah said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Emma's latest test results show that she's in complete remission. The doctors say her response to treatment has been extraordinary." Emma looked between the adults with the practical concern of a child who had spent too much time around medical professionals. "Does that mean I'm all better now?" "It means you're getting much, much better, sweetheart," Sarah said, scooping her daughter into her arms, "and we can finally plan that special trip back to see the palace that we've been talking about." William felt his throat tighten with emotion. Over the past months, he had visited many children in the hospital, some who had recovered, others who hadn't been as fortunate as Emma. Each visit had taught him something new about courage, hope, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. "There's something else," Sarah continued, pulling an official-looking envelope from her purse. "We received this yesterday from Buckingham Palace. It's an invitation for Emma to be the guest of honor at a special ceremony next month." William looked puzzled, as he hadn't heard anything about such an event through his usual channels. Sarah smiled at his confusion. "They're dedicating a new garden at the palace, the Children's Hope Garden. It's being funded entirely by donations. That came in response to your story with Emma. The Queen herself requested that Emma plant the first flower." The news hit William with the force of a revelation. What had started as a single moment of human kindness between a soldier and a sick child had grown into something that would leave a permanent mark on one of Britain's most historic landmarks. Emma, meanwhile, had been listening with the focused attention she reserved for truly important matters. "Mr. William," she said solemnly, "will you come to the garden ceremony with me? I want you to help me plant the first flower." Looking into her bright, healthy eyes, William realized that this little girl had taught him something profound about the nature of service. For 23 years he had protected the crown by standing perfectly still and following orders without question. But Emma had shown him that sometimes the greatest service came from moving toward others with an open heart. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," William replied, knowing that this ceremony would represent not just Emma's recovery but the transformation of everyone whose life had been touched by their unlikely friendship. The morning of the Children's Hope Garden dedication dawned bright and clear, as if the universe itself had decided to celebrate this remarkable day. William arrived at the palace 2 hours early, not because protocol required it, but because he was too excited and nervous to stay at home any longer. The garden itself had been constructed in a quiet corner of the palace grounds, designed specifically to be visible from the public areas where tourists gathered. Landscape architects had created a space that was both beautiful and meaningful, with winding paths that spelled out words like hope, courage, and kindness when viewed from above. At the center of the garden stood a simple wooden bench with a small plaque that read, "In honor of all the children who teach us that the smallest acts of love can change the world." Surrounding the bench were carefully prepared flower beds, waiting for the ceremonial planting that would officially open this special space. Media representatives from around the world had gathered to cover the event, but palace staff had worked hard to ensure that the ceremony itself remained intimate and child-focused. The guest list was deliberately small: Emma and her family, William, several other children who had been part of the hospital visit program, key palace officials, and of course, Her Majesty the Queen. When Emma arrived, William barely recognized the vibrant, healthy-looking girl who stepped out of the official palace car. Her hair had grown back in soft curls, her cheeks were full and rosy, and she was wearing a bright yellow dress that seemed to capture and reflect the morning sunshine. "Mr. William," she called out, running toward him with the uninhibited joy of a child who had been given a second chance at life. "Did you see? They made a whole garden because we were friends." William knelt down to embrace her, marveling at how strong and solid she felt in his arms. The fragile little girl who had sat quietly beside his post nearly a year ago had been transformed into this radiant young person, full of life and possibility. "Are you ready to plant our flower, Emma?" William asked, gesturing toward the ceremonial area where palace gardeners had prepared everything for the dedication. Emma nodded enthusiastically, then grew serious for a moment. "Mr. William, I brought something special for today." She reached into her small purse and pulled out a pressed flower, the same dandelion she had given him on that first day, now carefully preserved between sheets of clear plastic. "Mummy helped me save it," Emma explained. "I thought we could plant it in the garden so it can grow again and remind everyone about kindness." The ceremony itself was simple but deeply moving. The Queen spoke briefly about the power of human connection and how Emma and William's story had inspired people around the world to contribute to children's health research and hospital programs. She announced that the Emma Initiative had now expanded to 12 countries, with military personnel and children forming similar bonds of friendship and hope. When it came time for the actual planting, Emma and William knelt side by side at the central flower bed. Together, they placed the preserved dandelion into the specially prepared soil, surrounded by dozens of other flowers that had been donated by children from hospitals across the United Kingdom. As they worked, Emma chatted quietly with William about her plans for the future. She wanted to become a doctor so she could help other sick children, and she wanted to plant flowers in hospital gardens to make them more beautiful places. The crowd of onlookers watched in respectful silence as the unlikely pair finished their planting. When they stood up, brushing soil from their hands, spontaneous applause broke out from everyone present. But the most magical moment came next. As if on cue, dozens of other children who had been part of the hospital visit program stepped forward, each carrying a single flower. One by one, they planted their contributions around Emma and William's central dandelion, creating a living rainbow of color and hope. Later that evening, as William walked home through the London streets, he reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought him to this day. A year ago, he had been an anonymous soldier whose greatest achievement was his ability to remain motionless for hours at a time. Today, he was part of a story that had touched millions of lives and created lasting change in the world. His phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah Chen. "Emma fell asleep clutching the photo of you two from today's ceremony. She says you're not just her soldier anymore. You're her forever friend. Thank you for teaching our daughter and all of us that love is always stronger than fear." William smiled as he put his phone away, knowing that tomorrow he would return to his regular duties at the palace gates. Tourists would gather, cameras would click, and children would wave at him from behind the barriers. But now he understood something he hadn't before. Even when duty required him to remain still and silent, his presence itself could be an act of service, a reminder that behind every uniform was a human being capable of profound kindness. The dandelion Emma had given him that first day had indeed grown into something beautiful, not just a garden, but a living testament to the truth that the smallest seeds of compassion, when planted with love, can bloom into miracles that change the world.